Today, I want to talk to you about time. Your time in particular, how long it feels and how you use it. Now, before we get there, let me start by a shocker. 1 hour is 60 minutes. Indeed, every hour is 60 minutes. Regardless of what time it is, whether if it's 1 to 2, 4 to 5, or 9 to 10, we allocate the same amount of space to an hour in our clocks. We add, subtract, and multiply it just like a mathematical number. And we exchange and save it, easily substituting an hour in the morning with an hour in the afternoon. So yes, an hour is an hour, and it is 60 minutes. Until it's not. In 1929, Einstein famously said, when a man sits with a pretty girl for an hour, it seems like a minute. But let him sit on a hot stove for a minute, it will feel longer than any other hour. Now, Einstein was trying to demonstrate the concept of relativity here, but his analogy nonetheless holds when we are thinking about shrinking and expanding time perceptions. Today, I won't be talking to you about pretty girls, unfortunately, or hot stoves for that matter. My own experiences of shrinking and expanding time, how as a behavioral scientist I took them to the lab, studied them scientifically, and what we have learned from it. As I mentioned, I am a scientist, so my days are filled with activities like reading journal articles, designing and analyzing experiments, and reading, editing, and writing papers. This is literally what I do with every single hour of my day unless I'm teaching or I'm in a meeting. Now, a few years ago, I noticed an anomaly, an oddity in my behavior, if you will. I had just left one meeting and was about to go to another one with about an hour in between. And now what I've done, instead of taking up one of these research activities, all of which could have been achieved in that hour that I had, I went and checked my emails, I caught up on news, and I even ended up in Facebook. Before I knew it, the whole hour was gone and I had not done any of the research activities that I set out myself to do. I was baffled. Why had I treated this hour any differently than other hours of my day? Why was I using it in a suboptimal way? Upon some retrospection, I realized that having this looming meeting ahead of me somehow made that time feel shorter, and as an outcome, it felt insufficient to actually do a meaningful task. Put differently, I have taken that hour and shrunk it in my mind somehow. Now, this is odd behavior, but if it's only mine, it doesn't matter so much. What we need to figure out is if this is a systematic behavior that a lot of people engage in. To be able to do that, we go to the lab. In this instance, we have asked participants to consider a calendar, and we ask them to think about one of the two time periods. Either an hour that ended up in an activity, which we will call the bounded hour, or an hour that did not end up in an activity, which we're going to call the unbounded hour. Once we have assigned people to either think about a bounded or an unbounded hour, we ask them to tell us how many minutes they could spend reading in this hour. Looking first at the unbounded, participants told us that on average they could spend 50 minutes reading in this hour. Now that's interesting in and of itself. 1 hour, 60 minutes, but these participants were deducting 10 minutes off of it when they were telling us the available minutes they had to read. And it might make sense. They were probably accounting for an occasional bathroom trip or maybe a phone interruption. In my case, a potential trip to the fridge. What was more interesting to us, though, was what happened in the bounded hour condition, where we found that participants deducted another 10 minutes out of it. So instead of 50 minutes, now they were reporting having 40 minutes to read in this hour that ended up in an activity. So all in all, they were literally shrinking it further than they had any other hour that might be available to them. Now this is interesting, but it doesn't mean much if they are not using it any differently. To be able to look at time consumption, how people utilize this time, we ran a separate experiment. In this one, we recruited an online panel of participants. We asked them to tell us every single thing that they're going to be doing the next day with 15 minutes increments. This resulted in an individualized calendar for every participant, from which we could extract a bounded and an unbounded hour. So for half the people, we found an hour of their day that ended up in a meeting. And for the other half of the participants, we found an hour that did not end up in a meeting. Now, for the hour chosen individually for every participant, we have told them that we have an offer, a potential study for them to partake in the next day. And we said there was two options. They could either take a 30-minute study that paid $2.50, or they could take a 45-minute study that paid $5. Now, it's important to note that we know that the study takes 45 minutes. We know that they have at least one available hour, and we also know that the 45-minute study pays better on an hourly rate. So for all effective purposes, it is the dominating option which most people should be choosing. And indeed they did. In the unbounded hour, about 85% of the people chose that 45-minute study that was more lucrative. However, when we have looked at the bounded hour condition, we found that there was a 10% decline. Only about 75% of the people chose the 45-minute study. This tells us that literally 10% less people indeed chose an option that they had time for and it was more lucrative for them, effectively using their time in a suboptimal manner. This tells us that we don't need to sit next to a pretty girl, or a handsome man for that matter, to be able to experience the shrinkage of time. It is sufficient for us to have an upcoming task to look forward to, and bam, time shrinks right away. When time shrinks, it doesn't feel sufficient to complete lengthy activities, leading to some suboptimality. Now, if that's the problem, the solution seems to be obvious, right? If the shrinkage is what's causing us to behave suboptimally, let's find a way to expand it, and then everything will be okay. The logic makes sense, but let me tell you about a day last February that might make you think otherwise. I'm a working mom. My mornings are crazy to say the least. I have to get the kids dressed, get their lunches ready, get myself ready, get everybody out the door. Most of the days we get out the door with literally a second to spare. On that February morning, everything went unusually smooth. I didn't have to tell my son 4 times to put on his jacket, and my daughter miraculously wore the first dress I picked out for her. The lunches were already packed, and everybody was out the door with 10 minutes to spare. I was feeling time rich, like I had all the time in the world. My next meeting didn't start for 30 minutes. All I had to do was to pour some coffee, be out the door, get to the office early, and finish my emails before my meeting started. Except that I was late for my meeting, and I was baffled. Somehow I have turned having too much time into having too little of it. Upon some introspection, I realized that when I gained that 10 minutes, it gave me a false sense of security of having a lot of time in my hands, so I slowed down. I took my time pouring my coffee, walking to the car, even choosing a radio channel to listen. And before I knew it, I was actually behind. Well, here we have another paradox, so another opportunity to go back to the lab and study this a little bit better. But first, we actually examined how people behaved in the Daylight Saving Sunday. That's one day a year that we know that everybody gains an hour. So it gives us a perfect opportunity to see if the behaviors were any different. So we asked people whether they behaved any slower or faster on the Daylight Saving Sunday compared to other Sundays. What we found, like me, that people reported actually being slower that day compared to other Sundays, which is a very good first start, but it's not enough. Because what people say and what people do might not always overlap. In this instance, a Daylight Saving Sunday is a day most people believe is meant for relaxation, so they might be more likely to report that kind of behavior. To be able to understand if people are really behaving slower, we have to do a very different kind of experiment. And for that, we actually have to go back to the physical lab. In this case, the Fisher Behavioral Lab. For this experiment, we invited undergraduate students to take part in a research study, a 20-minute research study. Half of the participants knew that this was going to be a 20-minute study. So when they finished in 20 minutes, we just told them that they were done. The other group, though, we told them this was a 30-minute study. And when it ended in 20 minutes, everybody felt like they gained 10 minutes. And we reinforced that idea by telling them that, oh, wow, we finished early. You just gained 10 minutes. Now that we've effectively given half the people a sense of gain time compared to the other half, we had to find a way to measure their behavior. To be able to do that, an experimental told to participants that we had a lot of leftover stimuli from previous experiments and that they were free to browse through those on their way out and pick one if they wanted to. In the meantime, we placed another research assistant hiding in the corner, measuring exactly the seconds it took for them to leave the computer lab, walk through all the stimuli, and go to the elevator to leave the lab. What we found is that just like me on that February morning, participants were slower, in doing all of those activities if they felt like they gained time. It turns out we don't have to be sitting on a hot stove for time to feel plentiful. Any amount of gained time feels longer than an equivalent duration. And that time richness that we feel when we gain time actually gives us a full sense of security and slows us down, which oftentimes means that we don't take fully advantage of that extra time that we have. All in all, I hope that today I convinced you that not every hour feels the same, and that's okay, and it's normal. However, it is not the objective reality. An hour, after all, only has 60 minutes in it. While some might feel shorter than the others, the reality does not change. So my quick advice to you is that if you know that you have an hour, know that it's an hour, behave like it's an hour, plan for 60 minutes and use it for 60 minutes. Put differently, when it comes to time, don't trust your gut, but instead trust the clock.